Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we welcome you to the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitled Talkin Liberty. It's when we welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor. You all know who he is. We call him our guardian of individual liberty, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
Well, treacherous times for liberty, Scott, and the Department of Justice is apparently in some quarters seen as exploiting this crisis with a power grab. You put it, bye-bye habeas corpus, which literally means produce the body.
The writ of a habeas corpus, what it is you apply for a judge to sign the writ. That's the legal mechanism. When the judge actually signs that writ of habeas corpus, he's ordering a jailer, typically, but some other executive level authority, to bring your body to him, to his courtroom or her courtroom, and present them so that they can adjudge whether or not they are being held legally. It's one of our most precious of rights, and it is a direct right that we have under our with the federal courts, Tim, that doesn't have to do with any bit of federal law or federal regulation. It's in the Constitution that the courts have the power, and we have the ability to ask them to exercise that power. So the Justice Department, Tim, this story is a Politico exclusive by Betsy Woodruff Swan, who details the list of proposals in a COVID-19 sort of package that the Justice Department was asking for, downgrading, Tim, our right to habeas corpus by allowing increased, basically, distance procedures where people don't actually have to be brought to a courtroom, and also ways to avoid the process entirely by having courtrooms closed. Now, Tim, it's important to remember that the courts are in charge of managing the courts, and they don't need the Justice Department's help in their management. So the idea that this is just helpful information for the courts, they handle their own matters, including their own COVID-19 safety measures and so on. So this is a power grab, and it's feeling like more like a speech now, Tim. But I have to say that anytime there is a crisis, they will come for the liberty, and that's what seems like it's happening here.
This feels like another iteration of a 10th Amendment issue, the powers of the federal government versus the state. I think what you're saying then is that perhaps this is the right action to provide, distance testimony, for example, but that it's something that should be decided by local and state authorities, not by some decree from Washington.
Anytime we have a situation where the courts have less power to rule over people and the executive has more power over them in an arrestee situation, that is not a boon for liberty, Tim.
Well, here's something completely unsurprising. The Second Amendment is under attack during this coronavirus emergency. What are the tactics being used to try and limit the Second Amendment rights of Americans?
What we've seen, Tim, is that in anti-gun jurisdictions or jurisdictions where the person who makes the rules are anti-gun, they are including gun stores in lists of stores that must be closed and are not permitted to legally be open during the state of emergency that is declared. We saw this in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey, both. Both of those states had their cases go to court. We're still waiting to hear about the New Jersey ruling. The Pennsylvania case, the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania ruled that it was okay for gun stores to remain closed. But then, Tim, the governor quickly changed course and without much fanfare added the gun shops to a list of places that were approved for opening during the emergency. And to boot, a little icing on the cake, Tim, is a lot of these police departments are saying that they're releasing dangerous criminals to alleviate stress on the justice system, and also they're going to cease arresting or prosecuting lower-level criminal offenses. So we've got more criminals on the street, less protection for people, and at the same time they're being denied the constitutional right to protect themselves.
Well, at least now, about 3 weeks into this crisis, Scott, there are other things we're talking about, albeit ones that seem like a replay of arguments and debates that never get settled that we've been having for decades. And one of them, of course, is over abortions, where the two sides are so far apart, it's hard to create any common ground. And now Planned Parenthood, in the midst of all this, has sued Texas over that state's halt on abortions.
Well, this is akin to like the firearms issue, Tim. The Supreme Court has said that the right to obtain an abortion is a fundamental right, just like they've said that the right to keep and bear arms is a fundamental right. Now, the court has treated those two rights differently in their practice, whereby they have allowed all manner of restrictions against the exercise of the Second Amendment right, but against the abortion right, they have been very quick to carve sort of a wide path so that people can exercise that right. And the anti-abortion people in Texas and around the country have done just what the anti-gun people have done. They've seized on this as an opportunity to disallow abortions by saying that they are not essential, and they're included in a list of elective surgeries that are banned until the crisis is over. They have effectively been able to ban then abortions, and the suit challenges that. And I expect that I expect the federal courts will strike down that ban because of the nature of abortion jurisprudence in this country, and that it is a fundamental right.
Meanwhile, President Trump he's done a lot of things in this crisis. Of course, he's in front of the country every day for an hour or more. Among the things he's done is sign an executive order targeting three sort of catchphrases and words that are big right now, Scott: hoarding, price gouging, and supply chain.
Yes, Tim, this is, I think, a real detriment to our economy and our recovery when people who have goods that they can bring to market that people desperately want will now have to worry about whether or not they might be prosecuted for doing so. So if you had a warehouse full of these masks, for instance, and, I'm not talking about people who bought them a week and a half ago. Maybe you had it from 2 years ago. Are you called a hoarder now because you didn't bring them to market sooner? If I was advising a client, I would have to say, I don't know. I might just do nothing rather than go to federal prison. So these sorts of things we know economically don't work. The best thing that they can do is have a totally free market. That would increase the supply the most. So it's an imposition on liberty, and one that double dips him as a suppressor of actually getting these goods into the supply chain. So bad news all around there.
And you will continue to stand on the soapbox and be the last man standing defending price gouging. You make a good point about it, though.
Thank you, Tim. It is I will be out there all by myself.
Scott Cosenza, the last man standing. Okay. Now, I love the way you present this last story to me in a summary of what you were going to talk about. Everyone else is saying a $2 trillion relief package is passed by the Senate and goes on to the House, will be signed by the president. But you term it a $2 trillion tax increase.
Tim, I think it's incumbent upon us to realize this is a bill that these senators and congresspersons and the president just wrote that we're going to have to pay. There's this idea that, we're all going to be saved now, I think, because of this. But really, this is just a shifting of the future payments of some Americans to present-day payments to others. And I suspect that in that $2 trillion, there may be some dollars well spent, but that many, or if not most of them, will be to interest groups that are well placed to take advantage of an emergency need for a $2 trillion package.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue with our own Mark Angelides, all available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stay safe and stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.